Hello, welcome to a new tutorial presented by the Child 3B. In this tutorial, we are going to see the muscles of the back. Initially, we have already seen the muscles of the neck, and inside the muscle of the neck, we have already seen some of the muscles of the back. So we won't see again that. If you want to visualize the muscles which are located from this location above, then you're going to see in the muscles of the neck. We're going to start with the trapezius muscle. So this particular muscle here is called the trapezius muscle. So you have the descending part of trapezius muscle. Now the motions, we need to know that when you want to visualize the trapezius muscle, the first thing to visualize is the isolate it. So when we isolate the trapezius muscle, we have this. So now turning up, we have this. So we see that the trapezius muscle originates from the external occipital protuberance here with the superior nuchal line, and then it then inserts from C5 to this portion. So this is the superior part of the trapezius is going to insert at this portion, and also is going to insert on the spine of the scapula here, and also part of the clavicle here. Now let's see the action of the superior part of the trapezius. The motion of superior part of trapezius can be this motion. We have the extension and hyperflexion of the neck. We have shoulder retraction. We have this the head cervical spine lateral flexion. So this is because of the lateral rotation. It can do an extension, it can do a lateral flexion, it can do a the retraction causes to pull beside. So let's see the action of extension. That's a prior action of the superior part of the trapezius. So action of extension is going to be based on Newton's third law. For every action force, there is an equal but opposite reaction force which is performed, as we are going to see in this video. So you see how it's performing an extension. So deflection is not its function. That's why it's not yellow. So it's when it's yellow, it's perform extension. That's the time it's performing its action. Now we now move to the next action which is going to be performed. So after it, we are going to have the nerve. Now the nerve supply to it is going to be via the spinal accessory nerve, as you have already seen. We have the fourth cervical nerve, we have accessory nerve and third cervical nerve. So the main supply to the trapezius muscle is via the spinal accessory nerve. We can also, since it's posterior, you can also gain some posterior ramming via the fourth cervical nerve, accessory nerve, and the third cervical nerve. Now let's visualize the other portions. Come here. Posteriorly still. Posteriorly we have again we have this portion here, so we can already hide this. So we have the inferior part of we have the middle part of the transverse part of trapezius, and we have the inferior part of the trapezius. Now if you isolate the transverse part, we see now the origin of transverse part. So all this is going to be the origin and insertion. So this is going to end at the level of C5 and something, and this one is going to end at the level of T12. So all these are the characteristics of the transverse process, but the middle is starting from C7 to T4 vertebrae, and insertion is going to be on the scapula. But in case of the inferior portion, inferior part of the trapezius, or ascending part of trapezius, the origin will be from T5 to T12 vertebrae, and the insertion will be on the medial half of the spine. So this is the origin and insertion of different muscles. Now you have the same nerve isolation. If you isolate the nerve, you still see that it's going to receive from fourth cervical nerve, third cervical nerve, and accessory nerve. So these are the main nerves that are involved here. Now the next part that you need to visualize can also be the arterial supply to this particular nerve. The arterial supply will be via the dorsal scapular nerve. So the dorsal scapular nerve is the one which supply the muscles of the back here. Now after it, you have the next portion, the next muscle. So you can already remove this particular muscle here. So we're going to hide the trapezius muscle. So we pass to the next muscles of the back. The next muscle of the back will be this muscle here, and this muscle is called the rhomboid major, and this one is the rhomboid minor. Now the rhomboid major is also a muscle of upper limb, but you're not going to consider it again as muscle of upper limb in the latter section. So let's consider the rhomboid major. The rhomboid major, when we isolate the rhomboid major, we find that it originates from the spinous process of T2 to T5. So at T2 to T5 we have origin, and insertion is the medial border of the scapula. So after the rhomboid, you have this. You also have the motion that it performs. The motion that it performs is mostly in retraction. So the action that is going to perform is going to be retraction. Now you also have the rhomboid minor here, and the rhomboid minor has the origin. So the retraction is in this direction. So when you have a flexion done, so you first, the body needs to be flexed, and then the retraction is performed as such. So that's the retraction which has been performed, the direction. The next muscle which needs to be shown is the rhomboid minor. The rhomboid minor is starting from C7, originate from C7 to T1 vertebrae, and it is going to insert at the medial border of the scapula, adjacent to the spine of the scapula. So we have this. We can now have this, and we find the motion. The motion is still in retraction, so no need to show again. You have the nervous supply. Nervous supply rhomboid minor major is via the dorsal scapular nerve, which is branch of the brachial plexus. Now the rhomboid minor and the rhomboid major have two different nerve supplies. So when we come posteriorly, this is the rhomboid minor and this is the rhomboid major. For the nervous supply of the rhomboid major is going to be via still the dorsal scapular nerve. Now when turning again, visualizing a rhomboid, we see that the dorsal scapular nerve is the one which is involved, but the arteries which are involved in their allocation are going to be the dorsal branch of the foot posterior intercostal, or dorsal branch of the posterior intercostal still. All the are the posterior intercostal nerves, posterior intercostal arteries which are involved. So we can now hide this one, and we hide the other one here. So these are the two rhomboids which have been shaded. Now we hide the two rhomboids. Now at this portion you have another one with the siatus posterior superior muscle. We have the siatus posterior superior muscle here. Now the siatus posterior superior muscle, we can see now the isolation. So you need to isolate it. When you see the origin insertion, so direct info, we have origin. The origin is going to be from the nuchal ligament. The nuchal ligament is on, we've seen the nuchal ligament when we were visualizing the neck bones. So you have the nuchal ligaments directly here. It's originating from nuchal ligament and spinous process of C7 to T3, and it's going to insert at the external surface of the feet rib. So if you realize that we open here, we see that it's going to be inserted at the level of feet rib here at this portion. So we have this. We can shade it at we can have also the nervous supply. Now the nervous supply to it are going to be the anterior third ramus of thoracic. So we have the anterior ramus, and anterior ramus. So the siatus posterior, though it's a posterior muscle, it receives the anterior ramus of the thoracic nerves. So the third thoracic nerve, because initially said that it was found between C3 and when we come back to info, you see that it is found between C7 and T1. Now the thoracic nerve which are involved here, which are involved in its supply, are the thoracic nerve, the third thoracic nerve T3, we have T4, we have T5 which are involved here. So and we have also T2. Now the arterial supply are also still the intercostal arteries. So when we are already on the posterior part, just think about the branch of the intercostal arteries. Now we need to know that the intercostal artery, we are going to visualize the intercostal artery when we are going to see the thorax, because the intercostal artery, you need to know that it has the intercostal artery gains its supply from anteriorly from the internal thoracic artery and posterior from the dorsal, the dorsal descending thoracic descending aorta. So these are the two main portions from which the internal thoracic, the intercostal arch are going to receive their supply. So now the dorsal branch of the second part of the intercostal artery are involved. So all these are mostly intercostal artery supplying the muscles of the back. So now from there you can hide this muscle, and you can hide again this other muscle here. Now let's visualize the next muscle. We said you have already found this muscle, and this muscle was splinus capitis, that was seen in the muscles of the neck. Now coming down, this one is splinus cervicis, already found in the muscles of the neck. So we've not speak about that, we'll not speak about that again. So come downward, this muscle is called latissimus dorsi, and latissimus dorsi, we have information here. On the information of latissimus dorsi, we know that it's going to originate from the spinous processes of T7 to T12, and also going to take an origin from the iliac crest here. So it's also going to have an origin from iliac crest, from spinous process of T7 to T12, and take also an origin from iliac crest. And the ninth rib, we have 9 rib, and the thoraco, this is the thoracolumbar fascia. Also we're having an origin from thoracolumbar fascia and the iliac crest here. So it is going to insertion the floor of the intertubercular sulcus of the humerus. So we are going to see its insertion at the level of the humerus when we are going to see the upper limb. So it's going to insert somewhere here. Posteriorly is going to come up and insert at that position there. Now this is the latissimus dorsi muscle. Now let's see the action of latissimus dorsi. Since it's located posteriorly, it can have an action on the hand and it can have an action on the back. So you have latissimus dorsi using the retraction. You have action retraction. The next action can be shoulder depression because it's found posteriorly. It can also be found in the medial rotation. Now medial rotation action will be used mostly as an action of the upper limb. So let's visualize the major rotation action of latissimus dorsi. So all these are due to Newton's third law and due to the positioning of the muscle with respect to the joints. When one muscle is below a joint, then it's going to contract it such that it moves below the joint. So let's see major rotation. So major rotation can be seen as such. It's going to push it and so that it's coming in this direction. In case of the other muscle action, you have the shoulder depression. Shoulder depression is shown here. So we have the other muscle action. This is shoulder depression. So let's visualize shoulder depression. Shoulder depression, since it's located inferiorly, is going to cause the upper limb to move downward as such in shoulder depression. So these are the different muscles. You can also cause a protraction, cause the upper limb to move posteriorly as such. A retraction instead, not a protraction. Protraction causes the upper limb to move anteriorly, while retraction causes it to move posteriorly. So from now you can see now the nerve which is involved with latissimus dorsi. Nerve supply to latissimus dorsi. So nerve supply to latissimus dorsi is thoracic thoracodorsal nerve. The thoracodorsal nerve comes from the brachial plexus. So this is the brachial plexus. After the brachial plexus has been done, thoracodorsal nerve is going to come out from brachial plexus and going to give to the latissimus dorsi. Now you have the next muscles. So you have the arterial supply to latissimus dorsi. We have different parts of the lumbar artery, also have the intercostal artery, the thoracodorsal artery. All these are used in supply. So now we are going to fade this muscle, not fade, but instead to hide the muscle and also hide the other muscle, so that we can see again latissimus dorsi. When we hide the two muscles, now we enter into this other muscle are still we have the longissimus thoracis. So these are the muscles of the thorax now, back at the level of the thorax. So now let's see this muscle here. The muscle here is siatus posterior. So you have siatus posterior inferior. Initially we had siatus posterior and superior there. So we have superior siatus posterior inferior, siatus posterior inferior, and we had a siatus posterior superior. Now this siatus posterior inferior, we can say and isolate it in order for us to have the origin insertion. Now the origin, we have the spinous process of T11 to L2, and we have the insertion at the level of the 9 to 12 rib. This is the insertion. So you can see that it's going to depress the ribs. So that's the action. So you can have a small action. The action is going to depress the rib in this direction. So I have the action going to depress the rib. Now the nervous supply to it, since it's located at the back, so you can already guess that it's going to have. So this is instead anterior ramus. You have anterior ramus of the 9 thoracic nerve, the anterior ramus of the 12 thoracic nerve, the anterior ramus of 11 thoracic nerve. So it's not posterior ramus, but instead anterior ramus of this nerve. So the nerves are going to have anterior, they are going to be anterior located, and they are going to give part to the to this nerve, the siatus posterior inferior muscle. Now let's visualize. After visualizing this one, we can now visualize the arteria. The arteria is the subcostal artery, the intercostal artery, and the dorsal branch of 11 posterior intercostal artery. So we can hide this, and we hide this. Now we pass to the next muscle. The next muscle on the back will be this muscle here, and this muscle here is longissimus thoracis. The longissimus thoracis, if we isolate it, we are going to have its origin and insertion. So visualize very well. The origin of the longissimus thoracis is spinous process of L1 to L5. So from L1 here to L5 at this position. So L1 to L5, and the dorsal surface of the sacrum with the iliac crest. So all these are for longissimus thoracis, and they are going to now to insert at this position the transverse processes of the lumbar, thoracic, and second 12 ribs. So you have this. Now after having the longissimus thoracis, this longissimus thoracis, now we can find now the motion that's going to perform. Longissimus thoracis can perform extension motion, a hyperextension, or a lateral flexion, but the most important function is going to be the spine extension. So it's going to extend. It is doing slightly lateral flexion because it is slightly medial compared to the insertion point. The origin is slightly medial compared to the insertion point. So when you have a flexion, now the longissimus act by extending. So this is where the longissimus thoracis acts. It extends the back. So that's the action that it performs. Now after having the action, we now note the nerve to the longissimus thoracis. The nerves to the longissimus thoracis are going to pass all around here. They are going to be of posterior ramus. So we've seen that the anterior ramus are when the muscles are much more superficial and lateral. So when the muscles are much more superficial and lateral, they are going to be anterior ramus. So realize that when the muscles are like latissimus dorsi and other superficial muscles we've initially seen are going to be, and the siatus, we see the siatus posterior inferior and the siatus posterior superior. All of them, they were having posterior anterior ramus of the different nerve of the location that they are different location. Now here, if you the muscle, the more the muscle is medial and it is deep, then the more it's going to have the posterior ramus. The more the muscle is lateral and it is superficial, then the more it's going to have the anterior ramus. So that's the point to note. So coming back again to this point, we are going to visualize it. We have the nerve. After having the nerve, we have the arterial supply. Arterial supply are going to be the intercostal arteries we have the dorsal part, intercostal artery of the position they are located. Since this is moving from, we initially said that it's going to have from this portion, we have the different lumbar vertebrae L1 to L5 and the sacral part. So you are going to realize that, and also having some T fibers. From here is T4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'm going to realize that it's also going to receive some blood supply at this position, the intercostal arteries, which are located at the different the thoracic vertebrae. So now let's move on by hiding the two muscles. So we have the longissimus thoracis here, we hide here again. Now laterally here we have the other muscle called the iliocostalis thoracis. Now iliocostalis thoracis have origin, you can see their origin insertion by visualizing here. We see that it originates from the angle of 7 to 12 rib. So this is the angle of the 7 to 12 rib here. Is going to origin and it's going to insert at the angle of the first to seat rib. So it's going to originate at the angle of 7 to 12 rib, original angles of 7 to 12 rib at this position, and going to insert at these angles here of the first to seat rib. So from 7 to 12 and then insert at first to seat rib. So now the action that's going to perform is going to be a slight extension. So we are going to visualize extension that's going to perform. The extension is not going to be too prominent because it's not directly connected to the spinous processes. It's going to do a slight extension that we're going to visualize right now. So this flexion is not the one which is performing what that, and now extension, it is performing extension as such. So you see extension now is due to iliocostalis thoracis. So now let's go back and visualize the next muscles, the nervous supply of this muscle. The nervous supply of this muscle, you see that it is lateral, so you can think of anterior, but it's still major and much more dorsal. So you see that it's always the posterior rami because it is very deep. So that's why it is posterior rami of the different nerve in which they are located. We said that it is going to have origin from T7 to T12 and insertion from at the level of have an origin at the rib 7 to rib 12, and it's going to have an insertion with the angle of the rib of rib 1 to rib at the rib 6. So these are the different ones. So now let's continue by visualizing now the arteries involved here. Arteries involved here are going to be intercostal arteries, which are going to be particular regions. We can also have the supracostal artery here. Now we have to hide this muscle on both sides. So we come again on this side, the iliocostalis thoracis, we hide it. Now laterally here we have another muscle called the iliocostalis lumborum. This is the iliocostalis lumborum. The iliocostalis lumborum, we have the origin and the insertion. To see the origin and insertion, you need to isolate it. Now the origin is going to be iliac crest, the posterolateral aspect of the sacrum, and the posterolateral aspect of the sacrum. Now the insertion will be up here, the angle of the feet to 12 rib. So we have the angle of the feet to the 12 rib. So it's going to do an extension. So that's the function it's going to perform. And slightly we are going to move sideward, a lateral flexion. So that's the two function that you can see it perform. So you see here that you have lateral flexion and you have hyper extension. So now let's move to the nerves. The nerves that are going to be involved here are going to the posterior ramus still of the thoracic nerve at the different locations. Since it is from the thoracic vertebrae, it is going to start at the iliac crest and the lateral portion of the sacrum, and it's going to be from rib 3 to rib 12. Since at this position, it implies that the different thoracic nerves which are at this position are going to give their posterior rami. Now we have at the artery, you have the posterior, we have mostly the first, we have at first the posterior intercostal arteries. We have the intercostal artery which are giving the posterior rami to it, posterior branches. And now we also have, since it's also located on the lumbar portion, we also have the lumbar arteries here. So we have the first, second, third lumbar artery, since it's also located on the lumbar position here. So now we can hide it and hide it on the other side. So we don't have it again. We are going to have again this muscle here. This muscle is called the multifidus muscle. The multifidus muscle, and this multifidus muscle has, if you isolate it, you realize that you are going to see origin and insertion. The multifidus muscle starts from here and ends right up to here. So that's a multifidus muscle. So we have the origin is the posterior iliac. We have the posterior iliac spine. That's the origin. Posterior iliac spine. We have the sacrum. The posterior iliac spine. We have the sacrum here. We have the mammillary process. We have the lumbar vertebrae again in the origin. Now this the insertion. We have the spinous process of the lumbar vertebrae. So we have origin here. These are the different origin, and then it's going to insert at the spinous processes here as such. From this from the T12 to all right up to C3, all through the thorax and the cervical region of the neck. So now the nervous supply, we have the different intercostal muscles. We have the medial, all these are posterior rami of the nerve in which they are moving. We have first, we have the 8th thoracic, we have the 7th thoracic, the first lumbar, the 6th thoracic, and all the third lumbar. We have the 11th thoracic, and more so. So all this, we have also the arterial supply is also involved with the lumbar arteries, and since it's also going far up above here, it's also involved with the thoracic artery. We also have the dorsal part of the 9th posterior intercostal, and all that. The intercostal and the lumbar part are also going to be involved. So we are going to remove this multifidus muscle. We hide it on the other side again. Now the next muscle at this position here is going to be called the spinalis thoracis. The spinalis thoracis, when we come and isolate the muscle, we realize that it has an origin, visualizing posteriorly, it has an origin from spinous process of T11 to L3. So from T11 to L3 has spinous process, and then it's going to have an insertion here. So you realize that the action that is going to perform is not really an extension, but it's going to be a lateral flexion, because it is when they are going to contract, it's going to do this as such. It's going to do a lateral flexion. So these are the action, the origin and insertion. So you see the motion there will be a spine extension, but the spine extension is not hyper extension, only a small extension, and then it's going to do a lateral flexion. So the lateral flexion is going to be seen. So let's see the lateral flexion now by Newton's third law of motion. So this is the action which is performed, is doing a lateral flexion. So the action stop. Now it's going to do again a lateral flexion. So this is when it's performing a lateral flexion. So the spinalis thoracis muscle has an origin from the different lumbar vertebrae. So from T12 to L3, and it's going to have the insertion at these different points here. So it's from a T11 to L3, and it's going to have an insertion at T2 to T8. So since it's mostly on the same spinous processes, it implies that it's not going to be really involved with extension, but mostly involved with lateral flexion. So now we can now pass to the nerves. The nerves involved here are going to be the of posterior rami type of the motion, the part that they involved with. So we see that since they are moving from T11 to L, since they are moving from T2, T8 to T11 and L3, it implies that all the posterior rami of these nerves are going to be involved. But here it's going to be starting from T3. Now let's continue again. We hide this muscle, we hide the next muscle here. So this muscle here is going to be called the semi-spinalis thoracis. The semispinalis thoracis now is another muscle here. Now you can isolate the muscle to visualize it very well. So when we isolate the muscle, we have the T. It originates from T11 to and to T6 to T11. These are the origins here, and it's an insertion here. So you see it have an origin which is lateral, and that's an insertion which is medial. So you see that the action is going to still cause a lateral flexion. So now we come back and visualize the motion. You see that the motion, we have the spinal rotation, slightly spinal rotation, and spine extension. Now let's come to the nerve. To the nerve, you have still the posterior rami of the nerve in which they are moving. We initially said that they are located in C6T4 to T6T12. So the nerve of these domains are going to be involved. So let's come back to nerve. We have the posterior rami of 8 thoracic, we have 7 thoracic, so it's still in that domain, 6 thoracic, 5th thoracic, 9 thoracic, 4th thoracic, and all that. So now let's come to, we can now stop with this, the artery. Now we see that the artery are going to involve the internal thoracic of the different portion, 4th thoracic, 9, 6, 7, 1st, 3rd, and all that. Now you can now hide this muscle and then hide this other muscle. So we finished with all the superficial muscle. Now let's go to the furthest deep muscle. The furthest deep muscle are these muscles here. So these muscles are going to be called the long rotator muscles. So the long rotator muscles, we see it here that they have a certain origin. So when you isolate, you can see the different origin of the long rotator muscle. The different origin of the long rotator muscle is that the transverse posterior thoracic is going to originate from the transverse posterior thoracic vertebrae, and they are going to insert at the lamina of the spinous posterior of the two vertebrae segment above. So this is the first vertebrae, transverse posterior, and it's going to go to the lamina of this segment. Is going to pass this vertebrae and then go above it here. So this is the long rotator muscle. So it's used in rotation. From the name, you can always find the action that is rotating the trunk. So, and stabilizes the vertebrate. So this muscle is very necessary when somebody has lumbalgia with the dysfunctionality of the intervertebral disc. When somebody has a dysfunctionality of the intervertebral disc, used to stabilize the vertebrae so that the vertebrae should not quash each other, should not press against each other. When the vertebrae press against each other, it can cause a spinal lumbalgia and cause you a radiculopathy, making you to have nerve problems, you have certain paresthesias and discomfortable sensations. So now you can hide these muscles. Now you have found the motion. Now the next thing is the nerve. The nerve involved with it, we've initially said that it takes from the transverse process to the lamina of one bone, two vertebrae above. So you have to know that it will be for all. We have 8, we have 7 thoracic, we have 6 thoracic, we have 11 thoracic, we have 5th thoracic, so you have 9 thoracic. So most of the thoracic are involved. So the arteries, we already know that they are going to be the posterior intercostal artery at the different location they are found. So we can hide this muscle. We can then pass to the next muscle here. So this next muscle is going to be called the short rotator. That one was the long rotator. The short rotator is going to be only one vertebrae above. While the long rotator was for 2 vertebrae above, the short rotator was only 1 vertebra above. So it has the same functionality as the long rotator, and that same function, those same functionality are in rotation. So we have the motion here, rotation of the spine. After having the rotation, you can have the nerves. The nerves are also the same thing. You have the posterior, you have first the nerve here. The nerve are going to be the same thing. 8, the 7, the 6, the 11th, the 5th, the 9th, and all that. Now you are also going to have the arteries. The arteries are going to be similar with the short rotator muscles. So from here we've seen all the muscles which are involved here, and this muscle here is the levator costorum longi. So this is the last muscle which are going to involve in this tutorial on the muscles of the back, the levator costorum longi. So this is not a very important muscle. So and its action is very minute. So when you isolate the muscle, you realize that you have an origin from T8 to T10. That's the origin, and you have the insertion 2 ribs below. It takes the insertion 2 ribs below the different origins. So it comes 2 ribs below here, and 2 ribs below here, and 2 ribs below here. So you have this. So when you have all these muscles, you have a slight muscle again here. This muscle was not set, but this is also very important in stabilizing the vertebral column, and this is called this muscle, particular muscle, if you come here, is going to call the interspinalis thoracis, used in stabilizing the vertebral column, and it is found at the posterior part of the nuchal crest. So you can see that it's going to be from T2 to T12 all through the vertebral column, and also from the nuchal ligament. So, and it is going to insert in T1 to T11. So you see that the origin will be below and the insertion will be one spinous process above. That's why it's a reduction of 1 into this. So here is T2 to T12, and here is T1 to T11, because it's one spinous process above at the insertion. The nervous supply is the posterior rami of the thoracic nerve. So you have the simple to posterior and arterial. You have the posterior intercostal arteries. So these are all the nerves which are involved, the muscles which are involved in the back. From here we will say, these other muscles are the muscles which have seen in the neck. So from here we say thanks for your kind attention, and please don't forget to like and subscribe for the Science Video Makers channel. Thank you.